On July 19th, 1977, there was a punch. An event so monumental that it helped to not only kick off a new generation of manga, but one that helped to shape manga itself. In the first chapter of One Piece, a very cool and very iconic moment happened, which in my opinion often goes overlooked. It's after Luffy eats the Gum Gum fruit for the first time, after he receives his iconic hat, and even after he says he's going to be king of the pirates. In my opinion, this moment shows us the first case of the author, Eiichiro Oda, flexing his manga drawing skills in a major way. But to fully appreciate this moment, the context is always worth looking into. What makes this panel so satisfying? Context in manga creates a through line that can last from something as short as one panel to the next, or be separated by hundreds of chapters and dozens of volumes. There's a uniqueness to how this works, and because the flow of manga is so easy and seamless when done correctly, that when a moment can be fresh in our minds, the mangaka can capitalize on that with just a few short images and allow our brains to fill in the gaps. So just pages before the moment we're talking about today, Luffy tried to defend the honor of his idol, Shanks, the future Emperor of the Sea. Early in the chapter, a mountain bandit makes fun of him and disrespects him. Luffy stands up for Shanks. Luffy is taken hostage at sea by the mountain bandit Higuma. Higuma runs away realizing that he would get his ever-loving shit kicked in by Shanks and his crew. Although, Higuma, not realizing that the point of having a hostage is, well, having a hostage, kicks Luffy off of the ship. You know, get rid of your only bargaining chip. Luffy, who has now eaten the Gum Gum fruit, isn't able to swim because of the curse that affects Devil Fruit users. As Luffy starts to drown, we see a massive creature appear from the water. With this, Oda is able to set a timer. We know that Luffy can't last much longer in the water from the drowning, but then on top of it, adding an extra layer of a man-eating monster. Now the monster notices Luffy and begins his attack. What is it that we see here? First, we see the monster, whose official name is the Lord of the Coast, notice Luffy. Then, we see Luffy struggling to stay above the water and call out for help. The timer continues to click for Luffy, and there is a legitimate threat that he stands 0% chance against. He's in the middle of drowning, and then a predator of the sea is coming towards him. In the next panel, the Lord of the Coast opens its massive jaws and tries to swallow Luffy whole. The water is forced back and away from the Lord of the Coast. The dynamic pressure that it's creating is pushing towards us and away from the subjects to create a sense of movement and action. The creature opens its gigantic mouth, appearing to seem several times larger than Luffy. One important thing to notice in this panel and throughout the chapter is Oda's ability to utilize how the water interacts with the characters and the action that's happening on the page. He utilizes the water like action lines, and they are emphasizing the movement in characters that require attention in each panel. They almost are like arrows that run away from the Lord of the Coast as a representation of the water shooting backwards and away from Luffy. In the next panel, we have a quick snap of the Lord of the Coast jaws. From this we can see that his jaw clamped down and twisted to the side. Now, just by looking at this, before you see the next panel, can you see the path that the Lord of the Coast takes in your mind? How does he end up in his final position? First we see the open mouth and then to the snap of the jaws. We see that the teeth go to the right along with the rest of his head, and in your mind you should see how he ends up. His head will follow along that path from low and open to the right to end up here. Through the key moments of the action, using 3 panels dedicated to showing the simple snap of the Lord of the Coast jaws, Oda paints a clear picture from point A to point B. His head follows the path of this arrow, working its way across and around to reach the final panel. we see that the Lord of the Coast's head is exactly where we expected. The exact location is where your mind imagines it to be from the previous panels, and Oda's skill is what brings you there before you even see it. Shanks tells the Lord of the Coast to get lost in another great panel. If you remember the earlier panels of Shanks, you remember that his eyes had a much kinder, rounder, and more welcoming demeanor about them. But here, Oda is able to give us a surprising shift to cue us in that the fun-loving Shanks can get way more deadly than we originally thought. Later, we learned that he was using Conqueror's Haki here, but part of me doubts that Oda had that planned out when the first chapter hit the shelves. The seriousness and precision of his gaze, from the way his pupils stand out from the iris, creates a target-like appearance, stabbing into the Lord of the Coast. It's an extremely simple way to change someone's face. Look what would happen if we took out the extra circle. It just doesn't carry as much impact. Sure, you can tell he's pissed, but really, to have a seething hatred for something only comes in when you're able to really utilize staring daggers into it. The Lord of the Coast runs away and we get to see the aftermath. A moment that always needs to be highlighted is how Shanks immediately tries to comfort Luffy, and you can tell the genuine kindness on his face as he tells him to stop crying in a playful way. And after, we see that Shanks lost his arm to save Luffy from the Lord of the Coast. In my first video, we briefly talked about how panels should, in most cases, follow the Z path formation, which is the traditional, optimal path for a manga page to go down, and you see here that Oda does it extremely well. But also take a look at another important piece of framing that Oda puts on display. Again, Oda plays with the reflections and waves in the water, but do you see how they match and reflect the lines above it? Think about it this way, if they were out of the water, Oda likely would have just drawn lines there, but because the water is here, he's able to utilize the environment to show a symbol of the entire ocean highlighting what just happened, as if this is the most important event that happened on the seas that day, and many people would say that it was. To cap off this key moment in Luffy's life, Oda gives us probably the most iconic scene in One Piece's history. While this isn't the panel that we're talking about today, the whole point of this video is to look at a panel that's constantly overlooked in this chapter, the one that usually takes a backseat to the others, but there's no way that I can skip it. Shanks and Luffy get back to shore, and shortly after, Shanks' crew, the Red Hair Pirates, decide to set sail. Before leaving though, Shanks gives Luffy his iconic straw hat. In direct opposition to what we saw earlier, this panel is totally blank for the background. Action lines or reaction shots to this moment would just kind of kill the vibe. Here, Oda does more with less. In fact, it's almost minimalistic in the way that we're focused on what's happening. Luffy is challenged by Shanks to give the hat back to him when he becomes a great pirate. Luffy inherits this treasure, and it guides him towards setting off on his own adventure. Finally, 10 years later, Luffy has grown up, he has his iconic hat, and he is set off on his own journey to become Pirate King. But before looking at the main slice of the video, something to note is that in this point of the story, we know Luffy can stretch as a result of him eating the Gomu Gomu no Mi. But if this was your first time reading One Piece, whether you were one of the first to pick it up in 1997, or if this was your first experience today, you wouldn't know how the powers in the universe work. We see a teenage Luffy getting ready to punch the Lord of the Coast, but see how Oda hints that this isn't what we're expecting. See how Luffy takes a stance to punch unlike anything you've seen before, whether it be from boxers, or the MMA or UFC, or in other fighting manga. Look how his body is turned. His arm is cocked back way behind him, giving him ample room. His leg is on the seat, and his hand is on his shoulder. Then, in the final panel, Luffy is wheeled back in a stance, and the way Oda has positioned us as the reader is to build up momentum for the next jaw-dropping panel. We see Luffy starting to name his attack, and we excitedly anticipate what's coming next. Now, if you do know what's coming next, remember that this is the first chapter of the manga. If you've even seen a little bit of One Piece, whether it's reading a chapter, you glanced at an episode when you were a kid, or maybe you're even caught up with the series, you know what's coming when Luffy throws a punch. But for this, I want you to imagine yourself as a Shonen Jump reader on July 19, 1977. You are turning the pages of this brand new manga, One Piece. If you're really in tune, you know that the author of this new manga is the same Ichiro Oda who was an assistant on Rurouni Kenshin before One Piece hit the shelves. Maybe you're even familiar with Oda's early one-shots like Romance Dawn, which was the precursor to One Piece, or some of his other works like Wanted or Monsters. But you aren't yet familiar with One Piece. The largest manga in the world at the time is Dragon Ball Z. You don't know that One Piece will eventually go on to be the most successful manga of all time, with over 470 million units sold. You don't know what you're seeing for the first time. You might not even think that the series is that special so far. But then you turn the page and you see this. This is one of the best panels in One Piece that's so often overlooked. Really, along with the first chunk of One Piece, the East Blue Saga. It unfortunately gets lumped in as the part that's not really that good yet. You have to get to X part in One Piece to really see why it's one of the best. And I think this is an important moment for One Piece. Obviously, there is the symbolism of Luffy taking on the creature that took his idol's arm, the one that his idol lost protecting him, but look at how much the world of One Piece opens up with just this one panel. As I said earlier, we knew Luffy could stretch, but this is taking the idea to the extreme. Look at how his body has uncorked from what we saw earlier. This isn't just a punch, this is him throwing the entire weight of his body into it. He punches so hard that his foot comes off the ground. He has one leg behind and the other foot outstretched before him. He has his hand on his shoulder to help carry the monumentous force of this punch. His outstretched arm has the perfect amount of perspective, which perfectly allows our eyes to follow the punch. You begin to wonder, what else can he do? How far can he stretch? You start to think of rubber in the real world, and you start to think of the implications of how he could utilize this ability. Your imagination starts to take off. And Oda has guided us to this point by effectively demonstrating a unique and dynamic first real usage of his powers. Now look at the Lord of the Coast. He's hit so hard by the force of Luffy's punch that he's literally lifted out of the water. His scales are bending and folding over each other from the impact of Luffy's fist. Look at how Luffy's punched so hard that it's not just his head that came out. Oda twists and turns his body out of the water, which allows your eyes to trail along the massive torso, giving you a sense of scale for Luffy's accomplishment. Finally, take a look at the water. I said before during Shanks' panel that the way Oda drew the waves and reflections in the water highlighted Shanks' missing arm, and it's true again here. Oda is able to utilize the environment multiple times in a consistent way to ensure that there's a focus on what just happened. Look at what happens if we take the reflections away. It just doesn't carry as much weight. It's lacking a depth that was there before. And it's still a great picture, sure, it's well drawn, but the reflections that help to carry the action need to be there to help deliver the full impact of the panel. I mentioned earlier that if Shanks and Luffy were out of the water, the action lines would have been in place of where the water's reflection was. But look here, there are actually lines that go down beneath the Lord of the Coast that meet the water, and the water carries that down to the bottom of the panel. It creates a sense of connection through the page that helps it to flow better. The Lord of the Coast is carried by the shockwave that's been created from Luffy's punch. You see that there are chunks of water in the air not only around Luffy, but right by the head and face of the Lord of the Coast as well. It follows and centers around the impact point that Luffy delivered. And one of the most impressive things here is that even though there's a lot happening in this panel, from how the characters are positioned to the environment, the action, the delivery, etc., it's all neat. It doesn't feel cluttered. Oda doesn't go overboard with extra lines. It's just this. It's the delivery of a panel that means so much to the world of One Piece. It's really all of these things. The context, the art, the style, the cleanliness, the way it all comes together. This is what makes this panel flow. On an ending note, Oda may not be the strongest technical artist in the industry compared to the likes of One Punch Man, Berserk, Vagabond, and Bleach, to name a few. But there's an aspect of, yeah, sure, this art looks a little cartoony, but this is a pure and clean example of how to show power, perspective, and world building. His art is so good that it doesn't need an extreme amount of detail in the technical drawing sense to impress us. He's able to deliver it here. It's worth mentioning that I think Oda's later panels and setups far exceed what he's done here. This is really just the tip of the iceberg. But if it's worth anything, in my opinion, he does it better than almost anyone else in the industry. Oda is a master, and if you're looking to improve your own art and style, or if you're really just looking to have a good experience with a manga that has mastered the technical elements, you should read One Piece. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate you coming by. I really want to start taking deeper dives into other series, so if that interests you, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss it, and comment down below to recommend the next series, or specify which panel you'd like me to cover next. So thanks again, this has been Panel Flow, and I'll see you next time.